Something was buried beneath the Scottish Highlands for over 1,000 years. Not treasure, not bones, not gold. Something far more dangerous. A stone well, sealed tight, locked away from the world. And anyone who came close said they felt it. Not just the cold wind rolling in from the hills. Something deeper, something alive. For 10 centuries, no one dared to open it. The villagers warned their children. Priests built walls of stone and prayer around it. Even local authorities put up fences and told people to stay away. But nobody ever said why. And that is the part that should scare you. Because the people who sealed that well, they knew something. They saw something. And whatever they saw made them decide that the whole human race was better off not knowing. In this story, you are going to find out what they were hiding. You are going to discover the truth about what waits at the bottom of that ancient well. You are going to find out why a young American researcher named Marcus Webb broke every rule, removed the sealed stone, drank water that had sat untouched for 1,000 years, and what happened to him when he did. His eyes changed. His mind cracked open. And what he found inside that glowing blue light was something no human being was ever supposed to see. 3 things in this story are going to shake you. First, the ancient order that sealed this well were not protecting a secret from the world. They were protecting the world from something far older than themselves. Second, what lives inside that well is not dead. It was never dead. It was waiting, patiently, for exactly the right kind of person to come along. Third, what Marcus discovered at the bottom of that well did not just change one man's life. It changed the fate of every single human being on this planet. Let me show you exactly how this happened. Marcus Webb had never believed in legends. He was a scientist, an archaeologist from Chicago, a man who trusted measurements, data, and hard evidence above everything else. He had spent 6 years studying ancient stone structures across the United Kingdom and had never once found anything that cold. Patient, methodical work could not explain. But Scotland was different. He arrived in the small village of Dunharrow in October. The sky was flat and gray. The hills were covered in dark green moss and black rock. The air smelled like cold rain and old earth. It was exactly the kind of place that felt like it had been keeping secrets for so long that it had forgotten how to stop. Marcus had been sent by his university to study a cluster of ancient structures near the northern hills. Arrangements of standing stones, old carvings on exposed rock faces, the kind of fieldwork he had done dozens of times before. Professional, measured, safe. But on his second morning, an old woman stopped him on the road. She was small. Her face was deep with lines. Her eyes were pale blue and sharp as broken glass. She wore a dark coat and carried a walking stick. She looked at Marcus the way someone looks at a stranger walking happily toward the edge of a cliff in thick fog. She spoke slowly, carefully, like someone who had practiced these words for years, hoping they would never have to say them. She said there was something he should not go near. Beyond the third hill to the north, set between 2 black leaning stones, there was a well, a very old well, and this well had been sealed for as long as anyone in the village could remember. Sealed and left alone. The warning had been passed down through generations like an inheritance nobody wanted, but nobody could give away. Her grandmother had told her, and her grandmother's grandmother had told her. The chain went back so far that no one still living knew where it had started. Do not go near the 2 black stones. Do not touch the sealed granite. Do not open the well. Do not drink the water. Marcus thanked her. He walked back to his tent. He pulled out his topographic map and started looking for the third hill. He found the site on his 3rd day. It was exactly as she had described. 2 tall black stones leaning toward each other on a flat rise of ground between 2 hills. Between them sat the mouth of, well sealed, with a heavy slab of dark gray granite. The edges of the slab had been packed with a bonding mixture that had hardened to the consistency of ancient concrete over what must have been centuries. This had not been sealed quickly or carelessly. Someone had done this with intention, with permanence, with the specific goal of making sure this thing would never easily be opened again. Carved into the surface of the granite were symbols. Old ones, not Norse runes, not Celtic knotwork, not any form of writing Marcus had encountered in 6 years of field work across Britain and Europe. The lines were precise and clean, cut with something extraordinarily sharp. Each symbol was different. Each one felt purposeful, like letters in an alphabet no living scholar had ever catalogued. Marcus spent a long time crouching over those carvings in the cold October wind. He photographed every inch. He measured the stones. He ran his fingers along the carved lines and felt something pass through his hands that he could not name and did not know how to record. He called his colleague that evening. Her name was Dr. Eleanor Hart. She was based at the University of Edinburgh. 12 years of field experience. Sharp mind. Careful thinker. She arrived the following morning with a Land Rover full of equipment and a thermos of very strong tea. Eleanor looked at the carvings for about 4 minutes. Then she straightened up, put her hands in her pockets, and said very quietly that she did not recognize the symbol system. She said it carefully, the way scientists say things that frighten them, but that they cannot yet explain away. They spent 3 days at the site together, documenting, photographing, mapping. Marcus sent high-resolution images of the symbols to colleagues at 3 universities. 2 did not reply. The third came back with a short, uncomfortable 2-word response. Unknown origin. On the 4th night, Eleanor drove back to the village to sleep. Marcus stayed at the site alone. The sky was clear for the first time since he had arrived, and the stars above the Scottish hills were extraordinary. Bright and thick and very close. He was reviewing photographs on his laptop when he saw it. Light, coming from inside the well. A faint, pulsing blue light, thin and steady, pushing through the sealed cracks in the granite like the stone was trying to breathe. Like something below it had woken up. Like something down there knew it was no longer alone. Marcus stood slowly. His laptop slid off his knees. Every part of his scientific training gave him a clear set of instructions. Document this. Do not approach. Call Eleanor. Follow protocol first. He walked forward anyway. He pressed both hands flat against the granite slab. The light pulsed brighter beneath his palms. And then he heard something that stopped his breath completely. A voice. Not in the air. Not outside his ears. Inside his own head. Speaking in no human language he had ever heard. And yet Marcus understood every single word. The voice said, "You are late." The voice said, "We have been waiting." The voice said, "Are you ready to know the truth?" Marcus stood in the cold, dark Scottish night, with blue light bleeding through the stone beneath his hands, and the stars watching from above. He said yes. The granite slab should not have moved. Not for one man with no tools. The stone weighed several hundred kilograms. The sealed edges had been bonded for centuries. By every physical and practical measure, Marcus Webb had no business moving it at all. But when he pushed, it moved. Slowly at first, a deep grinding sound that rose from the earth itself and rolled across the dark hills in all directions. Marcus leaned his full weight against the stone. His boots slid back in the wet grass. His arms burned. The stone resisted the way something alive and reluctant resists. Then something changed. It was as if the well itself decided to cooperate. The grinding deepened and then softened. The slab shifted. 1 centimeter. Then 5. Then with a long, low exhalation of sound that felt like the earth breathing out after holding its breath for 1,000 years, the granite slab slid aside. The light came out like water. Blue, warm, alive. It rose from the open mouth of the well and spread across the surrounding stones and the grass and Marcus's face and hands. He looked down and saw the source. The well was full of water that glowed from within, not reflecting any outside light. Generating it, the water itself was luminous, moving slowly and calmly. Breathing. Marcus stood at the edge for a long time. His brain was cataloging everything it could. The color temperature of the light. The absence of any detectable heat in the air above the surface. The fact that a sealed well sitting untouched for 1,000 years should, by any scientific measure, be stagnant, dark, and dead. None of it matched anything he knew. He reached over the edge and lowered his hands toward the surface. The warmth rose to meet him before he even touched it. Not hot, not the cold he expected from deep well water. Warmth, exactly the temperature of a living human body, like reaching into a space where something alive had just been sitting. His hands entered the water. Every nerve in his body fired at once. Not painches, not cold, something electric and alive and intimate. The water was aware of him. He could feel it the way you feel another heartbeat when you press your palm against someone's chest. A presence, a recognition, something that knew his hands were there. He raised his hands slowly. The glowing water sat in his cupped palms. It did not drip. It held its shape gently, like it chose to stay. Marcus brought his hands to his mouth. He drank. The world disappeared. Not in darkness, not in sleep, in everything at once. He saw a sky with two suns, one white and cold, one orange and warm. Below those twin suns was a world of extraordinary structures, tall and clean and made of a material that was neither stone nor metal nor glass, but something with properties of all three. Between those structures moved beings, tall and thin and ancient, moving with a calm grace that spoke of thousands of years of civilization. One of them was standing apart from the others, looking directly at Marcus. Across what felt like thousands of years and millions of miles of empty space. The being opened its mouth. And again Marcus understood every single word. The voice was calm, unhurried, the voice of something so old that patience was no longer an effort, but simply a way of existing. It said, "My name cannot be held in your language, but you may call my kind what your ancestors called us. The architects." Marcus had no body that he could feel. He existed only as attention, pure receiving. The architect said, "We came to your world 12,000 years ago. We had been traveling for 800 years. We had visited over 400 worlds. We had found life on many of them. Complex life, civilizations, species of remarkable intelligence and achievement." A pause, and in that pause Marcus felt the quality of the silence change, like a room going still before something important is said. Then the architect said, "And then we found you." The vision shifted. Marcus saw Earth, ancient Earth, a world without cities or roads or fences. Small groups of humans scattered across vast wildernesses, gathered around fires, looking up at the night sky with wide, wondering eyes as something descended slowly from the clouds above them. The architects, not machines, not weapons, something that moved like light given the suggestion of a shape, coming down from the stars to stand among the earliest humans and observe something they had never in 800 years of exploration expected to find. Marcus watched all of it. The first contact, the careful study, the architects moving invisibly among ancient human settlements, observing everything with the same patient attention that Marcus himself had given to 1,000 fieldwork sites. He saw them record everything. He saw the moment they decided to leave something behind. Marcus opened his eyes. He was on his knees in the wet Scottish grass. His hands were still raised in front of him. They were glowing, a faint blue light running beneath his skin like veins made of captured starlight. He knelt there in the dark and the cold, and understood with absolute clarity that everything he thought he knew about human history was a story that had only just revealed its very first chapter. Elena arrived at dawn. She had woken in her room at the village inn at 4 in the morning, with a sensation she could not catalog or explain. A tightness behind her chest, a sense of urgency with no identifiable source. She lay in the dark for 40 minutes trying to go back to sleep, before giving up and driving up the hill road in the gray pre-dawn. When she reached the site, she stopped the Land Rover and sat with the engine running. The well was open. The blue light was rising from it like slow smoke into the morning air. Marcus was sitting in the wet grass 3 meters away. His knees were soaked through. His eyes were wide, and there was a faint luminescence running beneath the skin of his hands that she could see clearly even from inside the car. She walked to him carefully. She crouched down and looked at his face. He was present, not in shock, not confused. His eyes were focused and clear, and looking at something only he could see. He said, "They were not aliens. Not in the way we use that word." Elena said nothing. She was the kind of scientist who waited for evidence before reaching a conclusion. This was the hardest that practice had ever been tested. He said, "They were scientists, explorers, ancient ones. They traveled the universe not to conquer, but to understand. And 12,000 years ago they found Earth, and they found us, and they could not believe what they were looking at." Elena sat down in the grass beside him. Her trousers were immediately soaked through. She did not notice. He told her everything. The voice, the visions, the two-sun world, the beings he was calling the architects, the 12,000-year visit, the watching, the decision to leave a message behind. Elena was quiet for a long time after he finished. Then she said the thing she always said when confronted with something that challenged the foundations of what she knew. She said, "Show me the data." Marcus held out his hands. The blue light beneath his skin was faint but unmistakable, subtle as the glow inside a paper lantern. But real, verifiable. Elena pulled a UV light from her jacket pocket and held it over his hands. The luminescence shifted slightly in response to it. She reached out and touched the back of his right hand. She gasped. She pulled her hand back and pressed it hard against her own chest. She sat very still. She said, "There is something alive in there." Not in his hand, in the light itself. She had felt it the same way Marcus had felt it in the water. The warmth, the awareness, the unmistakable sense of another heartbeat in the glow. She said, very quietly, "What did they want from us?" Marcus told her what the architect had shown him. Over 800 years of exploration, the beings who would become the architects had visited more than 400 worlds. On many of them, they had found exactly what they expected. Intelligent life, complex societies, sophisticated civilizations that had grown to a certain level of organization and then stayed there. Comfortable, efficient, enduring, not growing, not reaching, not breaking things apart to see if something better could be built from the pieces. All 400 worlds had something the architects considered a natural equilibrium, a point at which civilization stabilized and remained. Not unhappily, not in stagnation exactly, just complete, like a river that had found its channel and stopped trying to go anywhere new. Humanity had no channel. Humanity had never stopped eroding the banks. The architects had a word for this quality. Marcus still could not say it in English, but the closest translation was something like, the drive to become, or perhaps more accurately, the refusal to accept that what already exists is enough. No other species in 800 years of exploration had demonstrated this. Not to the degree that humans had. They had watched humans burn and rebuild, fail and attempt again, invent fire and kill each other with it, and then use that same fire to cook food, warm shelters, and eventually fuse atoms. They had watched human beings write poetry about suffering and beauty in the same languages used to plan wars. They had watched a species that seemed determined to destroy itself, nonetheless keep finding reasons to try one more time. This was, according to the architects, the most remarkable thing they had ever observed in the universe. And it was simultaneously the most dangerous. Because the same drive that produced hospitals and cathedrals and symphonies also produced the capacity for catastrophic destruction. The same refusal to accept limitation that sent humans to the moon also produced the ability to poison the only planet they had. The architects had faced a question they could not easily answer. Was humanity's drive to become worth the risk it also represented? And that question, that ancient, patient, galaxy-spanning question, was the exact reason the well had been sealed. Not to hide knowledge, to hold it safely, until humanity had grown enough to carry it without being crushed or corrupted by the weight of it. The well was a judgment held in water, a test wrapped in light. And Marcus, stumbling across it in the hills of Scotland, pressing his hands against cold stone at 2 in the morning, because something in him simply could not leave it alone, was, according to the architects, exactly the kind of human they had hoped would one day find it. Eleanor spent the rest of the morning beside the well with her equipment. She worked the way she always worked, methodically, carefully, setting up measuring tools, collecting water samples in sterile glass vials, running preliminary analysis on the material of the slab and the symbols carved into its surface. The water samples glowed in their containers, blue and steady. The spectroscopic readings made no sense. The light was not bioluminescence. It was not chemiluminescence. It was not any category of light production that had a name in Eleanor's considerable scientific vocabulary. Marcus sat nearby with a notebook. He was writing fast. Not proper notes exactly. More like catching the last fragments of something falling through his hands. The visions were fading slowly, the way dreams fade in the morning light. He wrote as quickly as he could to hold onto everything. Around midday, the architect's voice came back. It did not arrive with any warning. No feeling of pressure. No change in temperature. It simply arrived the way fully formed thought arrives. Already present. Already speaking. From somewhere inside Marcus's own skull. It said, "There is something you have not yet been told." Marcus set down his pen. He kept his face still. He did not want to alarm Eleanor before he had heard everything. The architect said, "We did not seal the well only as a test." Something cold moved through Marcus's chest. Slow and certain. The voice said, "When we left this message 12,000 years ago, we were not alone in our interest in your world." It said, "There is another civilization, one far older than ours. We encountered them several centuries after beginning our own exploration. We called them the Dominion. They had been traveling the galaxy for a period of time that makes our own history look like an afternoon." A pause. Marcus said, inside his own head, "What did they want?" The architect said, "They are not curious. They are acquisitive." Marcus understood immediately. Some species explored. Some species consumed. The Dominion moved through the galaxy the way a slow tide moves through a coastline. Not destroying. Not attacking in any way that would be recognized as war. Simply arriving. Assessing. absorbing what was useful, the resources of a world, its data, its accumulated potential. Everything a civilization had built or grown or developed, taken with the calm efficiency of something that had done this so many times it had become simply the way they existed. The architects had argued for Earth at the Dominion's Council. They had stood before the oldest beings in the known galaxy and made the case that humanity represented something genuinely new, something that deserved the space and the time to develop on its own terms. The Dominion had listened. They were not violent. They were patient and rational, and they respected the architects' judgment as fellow ancient travelers. And they had agreed to one condition. When the Dominion returned to evaluate Earth, when they came back to make their final assessment, humanity would need to demonstrate that it had grown. Not technologically, not militarily, in wisdom, in the quality of its choices, in the evidence of whether that burning drive to become had produced something worthy of being left alone to continue. Marcus said, "When are they coming?" The architect said, "They have been traveling toward your solar system for 200 of your years." Marcus felt the blood leave his face entirely. He said, "How long do we have?" The architect was quiet for a moment that felt like standing at the edge of something with no bottom. Then it said, "Enough, if you are what we believe you are." Marcus walked to Alina. He sat beside her in the wet grass. He told her everything the voice had just said. Alina listened without interrupting once. When he finished, she was quiet for so long that Marcus thought she might not speak at all. Then she looked at the glowing vials of water sitting on her equipment table. She looked at them the way you look at something that is both an answer and an entirely new question at the same time. She said, "What are we supposed to do?" Marcus said, "There is more in the well. Something physical. The architect told me it is down there. Something it left alongside the message." He walked back to the edge. He looked down into the warm blue light. Then he reached both arms inches. Deeper than before. Down past the water's surface. Down into the warmth. And at the bottom, beneath where solid stone should have been, he felt something that was neither stone nor sediment. He lifted it out slowly. It was a disc, flat and circular, about the size of a large dinner plate, made of a material that was not metal, not stone, not ceramic, not anything Alina's instruments could categorize when she ran them over its surface minutes later. Warm to the touch, covered in the same symbols as the granite slab, but arranged in a new pattern. A radial pattern, like coordinates, like directions drawn in a language older than human civilization. And in its exact center was a hollow space, perfectly circular, about the size of a human fist, as if something that had once sat there had been removed, or was waiting patiently to be placed. Marcus turned it over carefully in his hands. He said, "This is not a record." Alina looked at him. He said, "It is a key." She said, "A key to what?" He looked out across the Scottish hills, the old gray sky, the old dark earth, the world he had spent 6 years studying and now understood almost nothing about. He said, "To whatever the architects built when they came here 12,000 years ago. Something bigger than this well, something buried far deeper, and I think the key already shows us where." He held the disc up and let the morning light catch its surface. The symbols on it pulsed once. Blue, warmth, patient. They found it in 22 days. Not in Scotland, not in England, not anywhere in Europe. The coordinates embedded in the disc, a pattern that Alina spent 11 days decoding using the symbol system from the well stones, pointed to a location in the Chihuahuan Desert of New Mexico. A flat and featureless stretch of sun-baked earth about 60 miles east of the nearest town. Empty from the surface in every direction. No visible structures. No unusual topographic features. Nothing that would make any satellite image worth a second look. Eleanor filed the travel as a geological survey. Marcus submitted a research access request through the university. They said as little as possible to as few people as possible. They did not manage to say nothing at all. By the time they arrived in New Mexico 3 weeks after opening the well in Scotland, they were accompanied by a team of 8 field specialists and a man named Colonel Richard Hayes from a government liaison office whose exact department name Marcus was never clearly told. Hayes was compact and precise with a crew cut, and the kind of careful stillness that comes from years of being in rooms where important things are said without being repeated. Hayes was openly skeptical. He made no effort to hide this. On the drive out to the coordinates, he said he had seen many people come to New Mexico with unusual theories. None of them had found anything. Nobody replied. They had run out of ways to argue and had decided to let the ground speak for itself. They broke through the surface layer at 11 meters. The chamber below was not natural. It was not a cave formed by any geological process. It was constructed, cut from the bedrock with a precision that Marcus recognized immediately as the same signature as the well stones in Scotland. Clean edges, exact angles, the unmistakable work of something that did not use human tools and did not make human-scale errors. The chamber was 52 meters across. The ceiling was 4 meters above the floor. Every surface was lined with panels of the same material as the disc Marcus had carried in his jacket pocket from Scotland. Every panel was covered in symbols. The air inside was dry and oddly warm, as if something had been generating a gentle heat down here continuously for a very long time. In the exact center of the chamber stood a structure. A console. A control system. Something built for hands. Not necessarily human hands, but hands. Designed clearly for physical interaction, covered in the same symbol system from the well and the disc. And at its center was a circular hollow exactly the size of the disc in Marcus's pocket. The team stood around the console in complete silence. Hayes had his hand on his sidearm. He had not drawn it, but his hand was there. Eleanor had her recording equipment running and her eyes on everything at once. Marcus took the disc from his pocket. He placed it in the hollow. The chamber came to life. Not suddenly, not explosively, like a sunrise. Gradual, building. Light spread from panel to panel across the walls in widening rings. Symbol systems activated in sequence. The air shifted, becoming warmer and richer. And a hum began somewhere deep below the floor that grew, until it was not just a sound, but a physical sensation felt in the teeth, in the spine, in the base of the skull. Then the architect spoke again. Not just to Marcus this time. To the room. To all of them. The voice came from the walls, from the panels, from everywhere at once. Calm, deep, patient beyond measure. The voice of something that had been waiting for so long, that waiting had long since ceased to feel like waiting at all. It said, "You found it. You chose to look. You chose to reach. You opened what was sealed. You carried what was given. You followed it to where it led. You passed." Hayes had gone completely still. His hand was still near his sidearm, but he had stopped breathing. The voice said, "This facility was built at the same time the well was sealed. Its purpose was singular. When humanity had grown enough to carry what we know, we wanted you to have it." The panels were displaying information in cascading waves. Languages and diagrams and star maps and equations and biological schematics and energy models. Layer after layer, in quantities that would take years to catalog and decades to fully understand. Sciences that humanity had not yet developed. Maps of the galaxy with hundreds of inhabited worlds plotted and named and described. Medical knowledge of a kind that could theoretically end diseases that had haunted the human race since its very beginning. Energy systems so sophisticated they made every power plant currently running on Earth look like a campfire in a rainstorm. And alongside all of it, the Dominion. Their roots, their timelines, their assessment criteria, the specific characteristics of civilizations they had evaluated and chosen to pass by. The arguments that had worked, the evidence of development that had caused them to change course in the past. Not a weapon, not armor, a guide, a diplomatic archive, a complete record of everything civilization needed to know in order to make the case for its own survival. Hayes slowly lowered his hand from his sidearm. He looked at the walls. He looked at the cascading information and the activated panels, and the man from Chicago who had arrived in Scotland for routine archaeological survey, and ended up standing at the center of the most important discovery in the history of the human race. Marcus stood in the light and felt something move through him that did not come from the water or the disc or the architect's voice. It came from further back, from something older, the weight of 12,000 years of waiting lifting from these chamber walls and settling, finally, onto human shoulders. He thought about the old woman on the road in Scotland, her pale blue eyes, her quiet warning given without expectation that it would be followed. He thought about pressing his hands against cold granite in the dark at 2 in the morning. He thought about every civilization on those star maps, every species that had found its channel and stayed there. Content, stable, complete. He thought about humanity, all of it, every war and every treaty, every species driven to extinction and everyone pulled back from the edge, every library burned and everyone rebuilt, every cruelty and every extraordinary, completely irrational act of kindness in the face of cruelty. The architects were right. It was not a flaw. Every shattered thing and every rebuilt thing, every act of reaching toward something just beyond the grasp. It had all been the point. Hayes stepped up beside him. He looked at the walls for a long moment. Then he looked at Marcus. He said, very quietly, "What do we do now?" Marcus looked at the ceiling, at the light, at the panels full of knowledge that humanity had just been handed, because something ancient and patient had believed in them enough to wait 12,000 years to deliver it. He said, "We learned." He said, "And then we show them who we are." Here is the thing that makes this story land differently the second time you sit with it. The architects did not return to rescue humanity. They did not send a ship, a signal, or an ambassador. They left something in a sealed well and a buried chamber, and they trusted that the species they had observed for 12,000 years would eventually produce exactly the right kind of person to find it. Not the strongest, not the most powerful, not the most advanced, the most human. Because the reason Marcus found that well was not extraordinary. It was deeply, completely, recognizably human. He refused to walk past the locked stone. He pressed his hands against cold granite in the middle of a dark night in a foreign country, because something inside him needed to know. Not for career advancement, not for fame, just because the question existed. And for humans, questions are a kind of hunger that never fully stops. That is what the architects saw 12,000 years ago. That is what made them argue for this species in front of the oldest council in the galaxy. That is what they sealed inside that ancient well and that buried desert chamber. Not a warning, not a trap. A gift, held in trust, for a species that never learned how to stop reaching. Even when it hurt, even when it failed, even when the rational choice was to let it go. The gift was waiting for the day humanity would prove it had grown enough to carry it. The Dominion is still coming. The clock is still moving. But for the first time in human history, the people looking up at the stars know what is out there, and have been given the knowledge to answer. If this story opened your eyes to what humanity is truly capable of, let me leave you with 3 things to carry from this story. First, the greatest discoveries in history were never made by the strongest or the most resourced. They were made by the ones who refused to walk past the locked door. The ones who pressed their hands against cold stone in the dark because something inside them simply had to know. Second, the universe is vast and ancient and full of civilizations far older than ours. And according to this story, what makes humanity remarkable among all of them is not our intelligence or our technology. It is the fact that we never learned how to stop reaching. Even when it costs everything, even when the rational choice is to stop, we reach anyway, every single time. Third, the sealed well was never meant to stay sealed forever. It was a promise, made by something old and wise to something young and burning, that when the time came, the truth would be waiting. That is exactly what this channel is about. Every story we tell here is built around that same idea. That humanity is something the universe did not expect, and that we keep proving it. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something about what it truly means to be human, hit that like button right now. 1 second. It helps more people find stories like this one. If you are new here, subscribe and hit the notification bell. New HFY stories drop every week, and every single one is built to remind you of something real. Now here is my question for you today. Leave your answer in the comments below. If you found that sealed well in the Scottish Highlands, alone, in the dark, with the blue light bleeding through the cracks in the stone, would you have opened it? Think carefully before you answer, because what you decide says everything about the kind of human you are. Watch the next video right now. The title is already on your screen. Because humanity's story is not finished. Not even close.